Panelists, Ms. Jen Nalunga from SEATINI Uganda. We also have Mr. Arnold Kwesiga from Uganda Consortium on Corporate Accountability. We have Ms. Lydia Wite from the Platform for Labor Action, Ms. Hadija Mwanje from Witness Radio, Mr. John Webe from International Accountability Project, and Council David Kabanda from the Center for Food and Adequate Living Rights. Ladies and gentlemen, you are very welcome to this discussion.
Where are we in the landscape? I want to anchor this discussion because we literally just completed, or we are into the third phase of the National Development Plan, which, as the National Development Plan 2, we continue to see the country anchoring its economic development in a private sector. And that is really, really important to kind of anchor this discussion, where we are looking at the private sector-led development. But with it, you get a challenge kind of trying to correlate development, economic development in that phase with human capital development, and always ask the question, how do we then ensure that the development path we are taking does not leave the people behind? And so many times, why this discussion is really important is that we have always had this interrogation saying, why do we have to put human rights in everything? You know, the country is developing, even countries that are looking at us and saying, you know, you need to ensure a human right-based approach to development or investment, had the worst form of violations when they were developing, and now they are developed. But the discussion and the importance of it is in the current tenets of development, looking at sustainable development, looking at economic development, looking at human capital development, it's really important to look at the human rights-based approach to that. And what does that mean? How do we ensure that this development works for the people? How do we ensure that the people with which we normally anchor all discussions around development are not left behind? And it's important that in our approaches in this country, where we have anchored our national development plan under private sector, because if you look at the wording saying, how do we create a conducive environment for private actors to do business? That is well and good, but what again do we put in place to ensure that while these private actors are involved in this development path, they respect human rights, they respect standards that we have set as a country, both corporate standards, corporate governance standards, human rights standards, environment standards, climate change principles that we're signing on to, and not leave the corporate sector to kind of regulate themselves. And that's where the challenge comes in, because we are looking at situations where the current environment as we have it is self-regulating, and sometimes it's extremely hard even for institutions that are put in place by the Constitution to ensure respect for human rights are thrown aside. The Uganda Human Rights Commission cannot hold or even call on to a private actor who is abusing rights to come and report to them, because they have this protective cover. And so that's how we continuously hear statements like your economic saboteurs or your anti-development, because every single time you raise issues within the sector of investments and human rights, you're looked at as anti-development. We have also had statements, well known, the president has said, leave my investors alone. The government has also talked about how do we create security, like the issue of securitization of investments, that every single investment you see in this country comes with a military detach or a form of security. And I think it's really important to understand and anchor the discussion on for whose interest are these investments, and how do we ensure that to attain sustainable development, there must be human capital development, which requires respect for human rights and ensuring that there is a human rights-based approach to investments and development.
All right. As we leave the investors alone, where have we left the citizen?
I think that is the question now we need to be interrogated, because, and we always ask the question, if I put it, can a country develop without its people developing? Because we've looked at so many situations where I say we have infrastructure development, there are so many companies coming in, the index, but how does that trickle down to that household that cannot afford a meal a day? How does that the kind of the maximization of profits within this sector, how does that trickle down to the people? And that is where the critical discussion needs to be with our planners as a government, but also everybody, including civil society, including media, including legal scholars. Everybody needs to look at how do we correlate these increased investments and development in the country to the household access to services.
All right. Civil society has taken up this issue, and I know that Center for Food and Adequate Living Rights and SEATINI have actually taken some steps. I'd like to hear from Mr. Kabanda. Why you got interested as civil society, but also what you have been able to do?
Thank you so much. We were interested when you listen to my colleague Arnold, the moment you talk about the word human rights. It is a two-letter word. The first one is human. We are looking at many investments using human beings as a shield to their investments. So there is a lot of exploitation, and what is actually happening is many of these investors or investments are taking people's rights and people's lives. So in many of these organized schemes, you find that there is no respect for human rights at all. And many people have lost their lives. And what we are telling Ugandans is that this is your life. Yes, we want to work, but many of your families are going to stay without you. So we have found out, and it is a fact, that in Uganda, if someone has an investment that they have started, they will be protected against the citizens. So the citizens are not protected at all. When you look at the laws are protecting the investor much more than they would have protected also the person who is working for them. So many of the people don't have protective gear when they are executing some of the work. Some of the work is very dangerous, like some of the hot substances, sharp substances, chemicals. We have seen women who work in flower farms, in palm oil, plantations, and there is no protection whatsoever, and this is a danger to their lives. So we have gone to court, and we have filed a public interest case, and we are specifically asking court, can you please amend the investment law such that before anyone invests in Uganda or comes up to employ people, the first thing that must be done is a human rights and social impact assessment. And secondly, in case of violations, can you please adequately compensate these lives? We are not saying that in a normal, environment, accidents will never occur. They will. This is why we have workman's compensation and everything. But you realize that generally, human rights are not protected at all. And we are also asking government that individuals who are very poor will never protect themselves against the bigger companies. So it is the role of government to protect the citizens.
You have mentioned that there are laws. Where are the weaknesses in these laws? Because, for example, when you talk about workman compensation, that is a law that basically states that if you are at work and you get injured in your, during your course of duty, your employer should compensate you. And the law goes as far as even showing what compensation should take place. We have the Employment Act that gives rights to employees. And yet I hear you saying that the legal framework doesn't seem to be strong enough to protect.
You see, there are two or three things that I want to bring out here. One, the laws are made by people. And by the time the law comes into being, it has a process that informs that law. So many times, the government that brings up this law, they have an agenda. So right now we are talking about financing models like the PPP financing model, like looking ahead to have direct foreign investment, and the government is only preoccupied by, making the environment very comfortable, for the investors. So when you come up with a law, and the preoccupation is about making profit. So the other eye where you have to have provisions to also protect the lives of the workers is lost at that point. But also secondly, the few provisions that we have in some of the laws that would have protected the people are not implemented, because what is ruling over everything is money. You've heard that government is interested in leave them, protect the investors, and people are too poor not to go for these jobs. Actually, many of these people are not even given protective gear, but they will take on. The problem is the formation of laws, but also their implementation is very limited.
All right. Let me bring Madame Nalunga into the discussion. Just continuing from where Mr. Kabanda has left off. As a country, we have a dilemma. Mr. Kabanda says the people are poor and therefore cannot negotiate. As a country, we are also poor. And from a summary of what's being said, it looks like we are not negotiating. I don't know if it's because of the fact that we are poor. What concerns do you have about, the legal framework we have that should be regulating these relationships?
Okay, thank you so much, and good afternoon, viewers. One, I think we are not poor. That's wrong. As a country, we are not poor. We have the people, we have the resources, so we are not poor. And that's one of the challenges we are facing, that mindset, that investors come here, we are poor, they are going to give us jobs, they are going to develop. That's totally wrong, and that's where we get it wrong. So we are not poor, and investment is not a charity. Any investment is a business. People come here to make money, and if the balance sheet doesn't balance, they don't come. So that's also, we need to have that in our mind. So when you look at the legal framework we have, it's true, because of that mindset that they are helping us, we are poor, then we become poor negotiators. We don't put the rights of the people, the rights of the environment, the rights of government in our investment legal frameworks and the treaties we negotiate. So the biggest challenge today is when you look at our legal framework, you look at the bilateral investment treaties we have signed, they have glaring gaps. And one of the the broad general gap, is what my colleagues have talked about, the fact that government has failed to balance the rights and obligations of the state, the investors, the people, the communities, and the environment. Those are the actors within the investment scenario. The balance is tilted towards the investors. And specifically, I can give an example of the Investment Code Act 2015 and the bilateral investment treaties Uganda has signed with a number of countries. In fact, it's a template, it's the same. When you look at the bilateral investment treaty we have signed with the UK, with Netherlands, it's the same. Investor protection. We allow the investor to come in, they do what they want, they go where they want, they take out what they have made. But specifically, Council Kabanda has raised the issue of the social and human rights impact assessments. They are not there, yet they should be there. The issue of performance requirement. When an investor comes here, you should be able to demand certain things. I'm giving you business. Put there what we need from the investor. Transfer technology. Give skills. Give decent employment. Source locally. Those things are not there in our bilateral investment treaties. the issue of remedy, dispute settlement, the remedy Council is talking about, it isn't there in the bilateral investment treaty. In fact, the issue of dispute resolution, which is in our bilateral investment treaty and in our investment code, is the one which is between the investor and government. And our laws and our treaties allow an investor to take our government to court, and not courts of Uganda, but courts in London, you know. So it is true that our investment legal frameworks are lacking. And as they are, it will be difficult to have a win-win-win situation. The winning is on the side of the investors.
All right. Mr. Kabanda did mention the fact that you went to court, the civil division of the High Court. What are you expecting court to do? Because one of the things he said is the law needs to be amended. That's a mandate for somebody else.
Yeah. Because you see that case, the beauty about public interest litigation is that you are taking one arm of government to another arm of government. And this arm of government, the judiciary, is telling the other arm of government, put that right. So what we are talking about here is what we are demanding government to do. So that judiciary, among other things which we are demanding for, because we're also demanding restitution of the human rights abuses done. But when it comes to amending the law, then the judiciary is taking the legislature to be able to put that in place.
All right, thank you very much. I'd like to bring Hadija in. And Hadija, you're from Witness Radio. And so for a few minutes here, I'd like you to be the witness. What have you seen on the ground in relation to the way the workers are living? Because, you know, we've been told broadly what the situation is. Let's hear from the witness.
Thank you so much. Yes, there is a lot that is happening on the ground, especially in regards to, I'll speak on land grabbing. There is a lot that is happening that leaves the rights of the people behind. One thing that is so evident is the lack of transparency in these business deals as they happen. When you go to the ground, you will find that many people will tell you that we woke up, saw people surveying land. The next time we saw, there were letters telling us to vacate. Before we were getting used to the vacation, and then there were state machinery swung into action. So there is a lot of human rights violations when it comes to investments in relation to land. So many people have not been compensated. So many people have been arrested. There are standards that investors are supposed to follow, but you notice that there is none. In some areas, I'll give you an example of Kalangala, where people were evicted. None of the leaders even has the contracts that were used to actually give a green light to the project. Because everything is done behind the knowledge of the people. One thing that I've noticed is that the foreign companies are taking advantage of the ignorance of their communities and thriving on that to take away everything that they have. We have seen people, people never imagine what it means waking up. This is why you've stayed for over 40 years and you have to leave. Without any negotiations on payment, you don't even know who is taking away the land. I'll give you an example of Kiriandongo, where I was in partnership with SEATINI. We went deep down to Kiriandongo, where over 35,000 people are being evicted. But people just walk up to notices telling them to register because land had been given to an investor, 3 multinationals. And in the night, these people come and beat up people, throw them out, and at the end of the day, people are actually more poor. People don't have where to stay, but you're protecting an investor. You don't know 35,000 people against 3 multinational companies. And who enjoys the profits? The profits are repatriated back. So at the end of the day, I think there is a lot to focus on in these business deals when it comes to communities and human rights. We are not saying that there shouldn't be development. Who doesn't want development? Everyone wants a better road. Everyone wants to see their place, uplifted. But how do you get to that? Development that lives behind the communities is not development.
All right.
I thank you.
Thank you very much. You have brought in the issue of land grabbing, and I'm reading here that Mr. John Mwebe is from International Accountability Project. But I know that you've done quite a bit of work in relation to land and the rights of people. When people are giving way for investments that no one here is saying are not needed, what needs to be taken care of?
Thank you so much, Gabriel, and good afternoon, our viewers. One thing that's very certain is that we require development as a country. And we know that the right to development presupposes that some of the people should be at the center of development as beneficiaries, but also as participants. And that's what the right to development talks about. And you notice that one of the things that investors need when they come to our country, the thing that they need is the one resource, which is land. That is one thing that they need, because from land, then they go on and do all the other things that they have to do. So you notice that it's the obligation of government to facilitate the acquisition of that land. Now, the challenge that we are having, and it's the challenge that is cutting across all areas where these investments are done, is that there's a feeling that the investor will not be able to invest if you do not give them preferential treatment. But also, there are many times when the state has ceded its responsibility of protecting the people and gone on to protect the investors. And we've seen it all over this country where investments are being done. And one of the things that's really troubling is that, one, for the investors themselves, they have the code of ethics that they should follow. And also there are all these national, regional, and international obligations that they have to fulfill, especially when there's acquisition of land, involving compensation, resettlement, providing alternative livelihood means. There are all these standards that have been set that have to be followed. But you realize that the greatest challenge we have is that the state struggles so much to shield them from ensuring that they do their obligation. That's one. Two, and I'm not shy about this, two is that there are very many brokers within government and within government institutions. So you notice that these brokers are having deals with investors, and in the end, it affects the people. Three, the securitization of acquisition of this land. And this is something my colleague Arnold talked about. You notice that in many places, there's this whole understanding of leave the issue of the land to me, I'll deal with it. And then you're going to see the army come running over the people, you're going to see military barracks. I'll tell you with certainty that in this country, there are very many spots where investors are working and they are guarded by the military. And they are guarded by the Uganda Police Defense Forces. And you have to move, and as you move, you have to ensure that you have clearance from the RDC, from the DPC, from the RPC in your own country, because then there's protection. And the protection before we even get to labor rights and all the other rights, it starts from the fact that the way the land was acquired is messy, and the people are pushing back because then land is the only means where they derive a livelihood.
Interesting. Let me bring Lydia into the conversation. Earlier on, it was said that, you know, these places where we're seeing some of these violations actually need the development. Let's start from the point of view, do the people in these places actually share that opinion? Because from what we've heard so far, it's a gloomy picture.
Thank you so much. Like my colleague said, we need a development. That is a given. No one doesn't want development. It is only that in that development, it is not participatory. It is not inclusive. There are people who are thought not to have an opinion when the businesses are being developed. But like my colleagues have already said, I think the investment climate or business climate in this country, it talks to us why our economy is the way it is, that we are a private sector led. And because we are private sector led, the private sector decides what to be done and not what to be done. And it even goes into the laws and policies. Once a country is private sector led, I want to tell you that it is the private entities that will decide what has to happen. That discussion has issued as, yes, countries have a private sector, but the government should be having the biggest hand at the end of the day. But because we are being led by the private sector, definitely they are going to have their hands at every point. And when my colleagues were submitting, I was just reflecting and saying, where are we going as a country? Because I imagine if the investors decided to stop investing, would as a country stop being? No, we'll have to move forward. So looking at the policy framework, I think it is important for the government to realize that businesses are very good for the people and we appreciate, but they must be participatory, they must be inclusive. The problem we are having is looking at, I'll talk about the workers, as a mere input. You know what, labor is one of the factors of production. So the investors always look at the labor force, for example, as mere input. And I'm talking about the land. The land will be looked at as a factor of production, and therefore at what cost I get it, I don't care. It's important to have a policy and legal framework that protects both parties. Because a protected workforce, for example, it's always very productive.
All right.
Yes.
You seem to point at the fact that there are gaps in, the laws when it comes to protection of the workers. What are some of the gaps that can be identified? Because I know you're from Platform for Labor Action, and, how can these gaps be filled? We can avail you another microphone as the technical team helps with that one.
Okay, I think we are back on. Sorry. One of the key gaps, of course, like my colleagues have noted, is that when you look at the investment laws and policies, issues of human rights are not part of it. And therefore, we have a policy gap. We have a legislative gap.
All right, let's simplify that. When we say issues of human rights are not incorporated, what are these issues of human rights? There's a problem with that microphone. Could you just give her another? And could the technician please come and help?
Thank you. Okay. What are some of those gaps, for example, in the law? I'll just take a peek at the current law, the Investment Code Act of 2019. It's very glamorous in terms of setting us for us the authority and trying to have databases and everything, but it is not specifically talking about or enabling this particular investor when it comes to human rights. It's not even requiring this investor to report. It's not even requiring this person to report on the performance of this particular business. How then would they even know what is happening? The other challenge we have is around enforcement. You talked about the various laws that we have, for example, around labor issues. And the enforcement is a challenge. You have all that legislation, and you have people who ought to be enforcing them, for example, like the district labor officers or commissioners. But we find that in some districts, we don't even have labor officers. They are not there. In fact, in some, we're having community development officers taking on the roles of a labor officer. And for sure, this is, labor is very wide. And if you're going to inspect, if I'm going to adjudicate, if I'm going to mediate, and all those functions require someone to be permanently there, and no one is there to man, definitely there is a gap. We have issues around funding, and I'm happy, I hope that the Ministry of Finance is here with us. Because Ministry of Finance has, at all times, I'll take a peek at the Labour Office, for example. It's a decentralized office. But this office being decentralized, the local governments are left with no option because they have what they call a wage ceiling. Every local government carries a wage ceiling. And they tell you, prioritize your human resource. And therefore, if the district feels like I did not prioritize labor, it means that the labor officer will not be there because the Ministry of Finance has put a ceiling on their wage seal, their wage limit. So even when you engage, there are even districts who go to the Ministry of Public Service to trade off the labor office for another officer. Why? Because the ministry has put a ceiling, and yet the ministry is well aware of the fact that all those offices ought to be filled up. But there is, at the same time, there is no money that is filling up those particular places. So it causes some of those gaps in terms of enforcement. But in the investment climate, is the lack. Even in law, you can even reference a law. But even just mere referencing a law in an investment code and say the investor shall adhere to the such laws is very, very powerful for such a law, because the investor at the back of the mind, remember, when they come to invest, they do what they call an investment analysis. So they will look at the investment laws. In most cases, the labor laws come the last, and that's if they're looking at them, and they only look at them perhaps when there is a case that has been reported against them. But if they are referenced, for example, if they are being demanded that you report on the performance of human rights, and of course, even as a country, for us to appreciate the fact that human rights are beyond, beyond labor, the environment. I see investments dumping waste just in front of people's doors, and you're wondering.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. I hope I can still be heard. If you could just help fix this microphone first. You asked if we have somebody from the Ministry of Finance. Yes, we do. We have Mr. Moses Kagwa from the Ministry of Finance, and I hope he is taking note and will be responding to many of these issues that have been raised. Lydia, one of the things you've raised is around, financing. And Mr. Mwebe, I'd like to come to you on this issue of, finance for development. And, this model that we have employed, is it working for us?
Thank you so much. Two things. We have all the investors that are coming in, and these are primarily private actors, because then they're coming in with the money and they're able to invest in the country. But also, we are looking at where our country falls the most, the development financing from international finance institutions. The third aspect of it is the financing arising from public-private partnerships. So we are looking at many prongs of financing that we have as a country. And we are well aware that much of the investments that we are having, much of the development that we are having is anchored around financing from different other sources. So one of the things that is happening and that is putting, that we are requiring to have a human face to the investments and this entire development is the fact that if you look at the investments that are coming, that are supported by international finance institutions, you realize that the very international finance institutions have safeguard policies that ensure that the rights of the people are not violated. As we talk about human rights, as we talk about the people being at the center of development, it's not lost on the financials at the international level. And so we realize that gradually we are seeing these financials coming in, talking about the policies, the safeguard policies that they are having, ensuring that before they finance or as they make an assessment of the financing they have to do for a project in Uganda, an investment they have to do in Uganda, the part, Uganda's part has to be that they adhere to these particular policies, that they make sure that the rights of the people are not violated. So what are we seeing gradually? We are seeing a gradual shift from ensuring that financing from the international finance institutions reduces because then there are so many requirements of adherence to the rights of the people, making sure that the rights of the people are upheld. And now we are gradually switching to public-private partnerships because then we are seeing the private hand where the investors are coming in to invest in development, but then they are ceding much of the liability of the violation of rights to the government. We notice that it's so common in our country to pay a deaf ear where people's rights are violated, people are being pushed off the land. We are having very many Chinese investments in Uganda where people don't have contracts, people don't have protective GIA. The labor rights are abused. We are seeing investors coming in and cutting down forests. The environment is affected. We are seeing investors that have been protected as they grab land in this country. So we are seeing a tactical shift from financing, which has been from the World Bank, Africa Development Bank, European Investment Bank, the FMOs, and now we are seeing most of the financing going to public-private partnership, where there is a lot of protection from government and increasingly the violation of rights of the people. So this is where now we have to put much emphasis, ensure that there are safeguard policies for these investors that are coming in, ensure that wherever they are registered or domiciled, we can hold them to account. And by that, with the financing, we can hold government to account from the part of the financing other than the implementation here, where we are seeing so much impunity. Thank you.
Let me come to Mr. Kabanda on some of those safeguards that Mr. Mwebe alludes to.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. I think the safeguards come from the development plan that we have. Unless when government now shifts to think about its population and emphasize the human capital development, we must have particular emphasis on livelihoods and we consider them as rights. You cannot have human beings as shields of profits. And this is why we are now talking about lives before profits. These people, the investors come here, and why they come here is because they'll have to use people, human beings. So the safeguards that we must see in our laws are centered around having human rights and social impact assessments, but number two, reference to human rights, because the human rights we are talking about, we already have a legal framework in our constitution. We need to follow that. And then we must make sure that the right to livelihood of these people who you are going to employ, who are making profits for you, So human beings must not be mingled within the, other capital investments that these are not like human beings who need their rights. I think that needs to be very clear in our laws as they get amended.
All right, thank you very much. Let me invite Mr. Kagwa to come and join the panel as I go to Mr. Kwesiga. One of the things that happens is, they say, willing buyer, willing seller. The people seem to be willing to work in these conditions. Is that the actual situation? All right, as he gets another microphone, Mr. Kagwa, you're very welcome. And yes, there are a number of things to respond to, and I'm going to come to you in just a second after Mr. Kwesiga. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. And, I want to bounce off my answer, the question you asked, Lydia. Do the people need this involvement? And it's really important to anchor this discussion around that. How often do we involve the people that we're trying to help in discussions around this development, and to them, how or what does development look like? It's really, so many times we are having this discussion and why we see increasing displacements, increasing conflicts, that every single area where there is natural resource exploitation or high level investments, there is conflict. Because the people have been neglected, or the people have not participated in this process of development. And we have always anchored this discussion to say, what does it cost to engage the people affected by a certain investment, or affected by a certain development, to meaningfully participate? And here we have always talked about the principle of free, prior, and informed consent. Engage with people. We are talking about development, we are talking about sustainable development, we are talking about human capital development. Why not consult, engage with the people, let them participate, understand the dynamics around this area and what development will look like, so that at the end of it all, you're having a sustainable way of developing, but also having a people-centered, people-participatory, getting the community that is affected to participate and agree to a project, but also to be, I always say they are the security of this project. But what we have continuously seen is that in most of the areas that investment and development projects are, the people are the enemy, and they turn to disputes and conflicts that never end, which affect the sustainability of these projects. All right, thank you. Jen, could you just tell us, even if the people got involved, there's the issue of power play. Are their voices loud enough to actually cause significant change?
I think the voices of the people are loud enough, because we have members of parliament, and from our sister Witness Radio, what they are talking about, those are the people's voices. So people are saying the investments on the ground are not developing them. They are undermining them. And there is no dispute about that, that the voices from the ground, they are saying this isn't the development we want. But I think we need also to be clear what development means. When we say development, we are developing. What does it mean? And I think we need also to review our development indicators, because we talk about GDP. Our GDP is going up. They tell us Uganda is the fastest growing country, and we are happy about that. But evidence on the ground is different. So we need to rethink what development is. We need to rethink what we need to see on the ground.
All right, let's come to Mr. Kagwa. You have heard what not just Jen, but the rest of the panelists have said. And it seems like investment is being prioritized at the expense of the rights of the citizens.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I've been listening in attentively, and some of these things are shocking. Let me say that, in my view, this is not the rule, but rather the exceptions, because we have also had so many cases where investments or investors have worked well with the community. We have had cases where investments have not taken place because the community has rallied against that investment. I'll give an example about artisanal miners. They're in so many areas, and despite the fact that land had been given to investors to explore and they have licenses, they cannot access this land because artisanal miners come and say, we have been here all our lives, so please don't come here, this is ours. So these things have actually gone on. And also when I heard about the law to change the investment code to put in human rights and work-related issues, then we would be changing the laws on investment, what investment actually is supposed to be, an investment law. And then we'll be capturing labor issues and human rights issues in the investment law. And that will be distortionary. Because like you cannot come and say, put criminal provisions in the labor, in the what? In a labor law or in an investment law. No, it has to be in the criminal code. And I know investors, some investors generally exert a lot of pressure on the people and maybe treat them unfairly. I won't also deny that. And one of the biggest challenges that people have is that they don't report. They are silent sufferers. And I think this is where we need to move in as civil society, as government, to try and see where are the people suffering and how are we championing their causes. Really, for me, that is the biggest message. But I want to say that we have also visited a number of investments where people are not outrightly mistreated. They are being treated well, they begin given lunch. They may not be paid a living wage, but at least in terms of that, that has happened in so many of the areas that we have visited. As I said, I'm not denying that there could be abuses, because abuses happen everywhere, but I am not denying that.
What is government doing where there are abuses in order to protect the citizens?
Of course, where there are abuses, really, outright abuses, and they have been reported, then the police takes over, because that becomes criminal. You cannot, for example, lock up somebody. Like I saw it sometime in Kenya where people where investors were repatriated because they were trouncing on the rights of the people. So if people can speak up, and I like this conversation, the NGOs have this evidence, if they can speak up, then action will certainly be taken.
All right.
I don't think there's anybody who would want a Ugandan to be mistreated by a foreigner, and there's no benefit that is coming out of that.
Mr. Kagwa says the suggestion to amend, the Investment Code Act will lead to a distortion because it will be mixed with human rights issues. Can Lydia, you'd like to respond? Sorry about the microphones. Let's try and get her another microphone. And please get us a sanitizer because
Thank you.
We had enough microphones. Now there are too few because just a few are working. Yes?
Thank you. I'm reacting to
Very briefly, please.
what Mr. Human Rights Commission said.
No. This is Mr. Kagwa from Ministry of Finance.
Mr. Kagwa, one thing that I have noticed from his comments, I am sorry, but I don't think you're in touch with the reality on the ground. You said they are silent sufferers. No, they are actually very loud, but they are silenced. There is a lot happening when it comes to intimidation, silencing. There are people who are in prison in Murende, and they've been in prison for over 2-3 years. How did it happen? These people, they woke up one time, they had been evicted from their land, they tried to push back, and a group was arrested. Up to now, over 20 people, 3 years down the road.
All right.
These people are suffering. So I think there is need to go down with an open mind. We don't really have to defend too much, but listen to what people are saying. Thank you.
Let's hear from Lydia.
Thank you, Director. I will just make a very quick response. When you say we don't want the investment law to become the human rights law or to become the employment law, no. We are saying let the investment law take cognizance of or reference the other very key important laws, so that even when the investor looks at this law, they have a reference telling them, you also have to adhere to the other laws that do exist.
Right.
For example, I can just give an example. Under the current the Investment Code Act, we can have under section 10.1, it empowers the Uganda Investment Authority to, among others, to monitor and evaluate all business activities in Uganda. That can be expounded upon, perhaps in a regulation, and say, among the things to be monitored are how the business is adhering to those laws that have been referenced in that particular law. Okay. So we are not saying that we lift the provisions of the Employment Act or the Human Rights or Constitution into the investment, but just reference them. And then in the regulations, we should be able to expound on the monitoring and what are we exactly looking at.
All right.
Thank you.
We're running out of time. Mr. Kagwa, those suggestions on how to amend the law, but also an understanding of what government does after the investor comes. What government does to actually ensure that the investor is respecting the rights of the people that they employ and the people around where the investment is.
Thank you very much. This is not a defense. And I just want to say, you have a case that you know. And that doesn't mean that because I don't know it, I'm defensive. There's so many things that can happen everywhere. So please, if you have a case like that, then bring it up. Let's all look at it, because that will help us. Government does not condone human rights abuses at any one time, at least as far as investors are concerned. So any time there is an abuse and it's brought to the attention of either the Human Rights Commission, Ministry of Labor and Gender, because they are there, they are in charge of that, then it will be taken up. And actually there are procedures for handling of any grievances.
All right.
Yes.
There was an issue of, there have to be labor officers in the districts, and those are not there because of the caps being put by the Ministry of Finance. That has been identified as a barrier.
Well, I can't say for sure whether there's the cap is a cause of lack of staff in particular districts, because the districts are supposed to highlight the people they want to employ, and most times they may not employ everybody. but they do employ what they call the critical staff.
All
and
right.
they are there. Thank you.
Okay. We are out of time for our viewers on NBS TV. So I'm going to allow for each of us to just use 20 seconds to say something in closing. I will start from the extreme end, Lydia, and then come downwards. Don't switch the microphone off after you've used it. Just give it to the next person and use the sanitizer.
Well, thank you so much. I think for me, my closing end, I'll just stop from where the director has stopped. That director, we need the Labour Ministry to be financed. The Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development is for everything, the youth, the child, the laborer, the who, and everyone.
All right.
But Minister, Director, you are well aware that it's the least financed ministry. And
So,
people that
so financing for
yes.
the Ministry of Labour.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. Adija?
Thank you so much. Mine would be that we focus more on human rights when we are reaching out business deals. Do the people that we want to have here, are they contributing to the development of our people? And do we have strong laws that can help guide that? Do we have guidelines? I think we should really focus on that because it will help a lot protect the communities. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. John?
Development should have humans at the center of it as participants and beneficiaries. If the state can always look at that and put the people before the profit and their interest, it would make a difference.
Thank you very much, John. Jen?
Human rights violations are not just in Uganda alone, and that's why the UN is discussing the UN binding treaty on business and human rights, and we should support it.
All right, Jen, before you pass that microphone, there are also other treaties that we are signatories to. How come they haven't helped?
Because we haven't mainstreamed them into the trade and investment treaties and agreements. Because, for example, we have the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights.
Yes.
But we have to transport that into our trade and investment treaties.
Right.
And that's why we are saying in our investment code, we should put there the social and human rights impact assessments.
All right, we just sneaked in another recommendation. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. I will speak to one of the major concerns, and this I got dealing with intergovernmental ministers while developing the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. One of the major problems when it comes to investments and human rights is that we have politicized the sector. Everything, including RDCs on the ground, can interfere in technical decisions that are supposed to be taken by technical staff. We have had investors calling on to all kinds of people, throwing around names, and you will have the military to stop. And lastly, and I remember we were in Fort Portal recently, and a director is talking about, we have this language, we don't condone violations. But we have been in places where the DPC tells you, if a company calls me and say we are being abused or our rights are being abused, he said this in his words: my number one objective is to ensure that the investor is safe. Because the principal would want me to do that. Okay. So you find, how do we take politics out of this and understand that at the heart of investment and development are human beings whose development should be anchored within the whole framework. And I think we need to go back to ensure that human capital development should drive the whole strategy around National Development Plan and other development strategies. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Kagwa? It's on.
Thank you. Well, all I will say is that this has been a wonderful opportunity for me to listen to you. Let's have your proposals. We will discuss further to see how they can be implemented. As I've said before, and I need to reiterate, the issues of human rights are already enshrined in our Constitution, and that is the supreme law of the land. People can say so many things they want, but we have a law to assist, and then there are very different, so many legislations, pieces of legislation that attest to this. So where there are apparent abuses, please let us all report them. I don't want someone to say because an RDC has said this, then that is the law. RDCs have said so many things that have been challenged. So there is no one who is above the law, and I think HE, the president, has been very clear on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all our panelists, including Mr. Kabanda, who had to leave the panel because of space to accommodate Mr. Kagwa. And thank you very much at home for watching this on NBS TV and other platforms. It is not development if the people for whom the development is being done are left behind. So do your part in ensuring that development does not happen exclusive of human rights. Thank you very much for watching us. This conversation continues on online platforms. And for those of you who
economic growth in order to make investment work for the people, communities, and environment, and to protect human rights, to also balance the rights and obligations of corporations, changes must be made in our investment policies, laws, and agreements.
It's against this background that the Southern and Eastern Africa Trade Information and Negotiations Institute, SEATINI Uganda, together with UCCA,
CEFROHT, Witness Radio, PLA, with support from Diakonia Africa Economic Justice Program, are convening a conference under the theme Life Before Profits, Assessing Uganda's Investment Frameworks Amidst the Proliferating Number of Human Rights Violations, which will take place on Monday, 30th of November 2020. Panelists will include Ms. Jane Nalunga, Executive Director, SEATINI Uganda, Ms. Hadija Mwanje, Head of Media and Communications, Witness Radio, Mr. David Kabanda, Executive Director, CEFROHT, Mr. Arnold Kwesiga, Project Coordinator, UCCA, Mr. John Kalibala Mwebe, Program Coordinator, IAP, and Ms. Lydia Buite, Programs Manager, PLA.
The guest speaker, Mr. Moses Kagwa, Acting Director, Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. Moderated by Gabriel Iguma. The proceedings will be aired live on NBS TV from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Sponsored by